Welcome back, so happy to see you again. And what you see behind me is Gdynia Beach, where I prefer to do some long-term thinking every day. Pretty beautiful, right? So this is what we're going to talk about today, plus how you can think for long-term and avoid the short-term. But first, let's get back home, shall we? It's quite windy here.
So long-term thinking is our ability to make decisions that will impact us very positively years and decades ahead. That's the definition we can go for. It's often been described to be one of the most critical factors for massive success, or as Alex Hormozi puts it, the wealthiest people think in decades, not days. It's absolutely related to productivity, since you probably remember that our definition is getting what you want per unit of time, and long-term thinking puts us in the biggest unit of time. But long-term thinking is quite unnatural for us, since we evolved in an uncertain environment, hunting and gathering food, and probably the lifespan wasn't as great as now. And even today, the fact that we often have bad habits and try to shortcut our way to what we want speaks to that as well. And for many months, I was even against the notion of long-term thinking. It's pretty much impossible to predict future events, so I was more focused on how I could benefit from whatever happened instead. More opportunistic and impatient rather than patient, in other words. I then learned about the niche slapping fallacy, which tells that everything we do can be insanely huge, but nothing can work out if you pursue many things at once. I also realized some serious deficiencies I had that is painfully obvious in hindsight. So I went completely 180 and I'm now going all in on one thing. Guess what that one thing is for me? It was during that time that I learned the value of thinking long-term instead of thinking short-term. Aside from the benefits like the classic exponential curve, giving value without needing anything in return, and compound interest, which is the eighth wonder of the world, according to a very smart guy. There were three other benefits that I never understood before that I want to share with you right now. The first one is that consistency is super easy now. When I participated in the riding course Ship 30 for 30, which I highly recommend by the way, the most common problem people had was consistency, that they could not show up every day. It was too hard for them. But if you have a long horizon over multiple decades in which you do one thing to its completion and even more than that, you have a very easy time being consistent, because now you're optimizing for sustainability, for whatever life outcome. We can talk travel, we can talk people coming in, we can talk various illnesses, stuff like that. You account for all these possible life scenarios and then make sure that what you're doing right now will fit into that. So you not get thrown off track, you get enough rest and margins to never tire out or stress out. The second one is the non-comparison. Because I gotta admit, for all of my life, and probably still today, I don't know, I cannot help but compare to others right now and question my own path, something you probably have experienced as well. But since I introduced long-term thinking, I started to ask myself how all these similar age people I compare myself to, how would they fare in 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? And as long as my own growth, and this perfectly applies to you as well, never went down during that time, but always up, this could definitely have a big effect when these years are past. If all these people ended up flatlining or even experienced some major hiccups along the way because they were too greedy when times were great, this could certainly make a difference too. So when I realized that, I don't need to worry about not having things like status and clout right now, because I can wait for it. Right now, I can build the foundation, become better at what I want from ground up, and most of all, transfer every piece of discovery to you now, so that when both you and I together end up on the top, we will not be blown down, because we have the foundational skill set and the foundational character traits and all that stuff. And we will also not be manipulated by others, because we are non-needy. The third benefit was just a big realization that time will pass anyway. No matter how much or how little we think far ahead, we'll still end up on the same place years later. Like, let's say you're working for something that will probably take 10 years to realize, and when these 10 years have passed, it would definitely show that you thought that way. And to give you a bonus benefit before we go into tactics, I want to share with you an observation I had called the trust cycle, which basically means that it takes time to build trust, whether it's for books or for people. For example, I've said multiple times by now that Anti-Fragile is my most favorite book, but it took 4 months from when I first went through the book to when I went through it again and again. It also took around 2 years from when I heard about the book in some random YouTube video to when I got it and consumed it. And in the same way, some of my biggest favorites on YouTube right now also took a while for me to recognize. Like, for instance, Casey Neistat, a phenomenal YouTuber. I first heard about him back in 2016, which is roughly 6 or 7 years ago, but only watched one of his videos in 2021, 5 years later from that. And then in 2022, I watched him again and become hooked, watched through all of his vlogs and classics and all that stuff. And finally this year, I made a video about what we can all learn from it, so the trust has been completed, so as you can say. So what I'm saying is that if you're also starting out and not seeing traction, it might be because many people start in the trust cycle with you. They see your name in various places, and then a long time later, they end up seeing what you do, and then later than that, they become impressed by what you do. And then fans for life, which is the ultimate thing. Now in my case it's quite extreme, and I have to admit I'm not an early adopter when it comes to YouTube. So therefore I'm so deeply grateful that both you and I have found each other when we both are very small, because it might be very different in a couple of years. And now, as promised, I'll give you my greatest tips that have worked for me when it comes to thinking long term and how to actually do it and never fall for the short term to go down. And compared to other more mainstream advice of like writing down your goal and writing down your dream life in vivid detail and see it every day taped on the wall, I'm more interested in why we fall for the short term and then solving the root issues so that we cannot help but think long term. And the 3 root causes for short-term thinking I have found are: I'm afraid to commit, I want more confidence, or I cannot handle temptations or shiny objects. When it comes to being afraid to commit, this is a pretty big one actually. Like, what if I spend the next 10 years on something and it still does not work out and it ends up being wasted all that time? And then we got all this talk of following your passion and not having a passion and all that stuff. But if we look at the niche slapping fallacy instead, we get a different answer. As long as what we commit to is obviously a bad decision, like for instance selling newspaper when the market is shrinking every year, we can make everything work out. If both you and I become the best, or at least top 5 one thing, it's going to reward us disproportionately more than being number 10 or 20 or 30. Take the one thing that you're best at and you also find extremely enjoyable to do. And in my case, I'm extremely obsessed with productivity, leveling up, and also talking to you every day. I've also done podcasting and still the writing, but I feel it's in video that I feel I can fully express myself. Next, we have confidence and our universal need to feel good about ourselves, what we're doing, gain respect from others, from the opposite sex and all that stuff. And then we hear stuff like confidence is self-delusion, unless you have evidence for it. But then you also have imposter syndrome and self-doubt and Dunning-Kruger effect, and so it doesn't really work for me, that's what I want to say. But 3 days ago, I found the answer that changed everything for me when it came to confidence, and I want you to listen closely on that one. As long as I'm on the right track towards what I want and my activities reflect that, I can be just as confident now as when I get what I want. Do you see how game-changing it is? This means that we do not need to achieve our dreams to be confident. We can be 110% confident right now just by being on the right path towards our dreams. And since I realized it, I've never felt so confident in my life, and we'll probably make a separate video about it. And even when we are not good at something, we can accept that and feel happy that we are paying attention to our errors, paying attention to our negative feelings, and learning as fast as humanly possible. So now we got 2 covered, and the last one is once again involving our very friend dopamine. I bet you, like me, have these moments when you're a little bit tired and just cannot resist the temptation that comes up with, so that you lose yourself and indulge instead. But as I've said in other videos, dopamine is also subjective, and this means that we can pride ourselves in not falling for the temptation, or at least use it in heavy moderation. And especially when we are extremely comfortable doing nothing, the temptations lose even more power to grab us. And meanwhile, we are extremely excited that we're taking the right path, that we yield dividends now and later. So now that we can commit to what we like, can gain confidence on being on the right path, no matter how prestigious we look now, and attach dopamine to what we find meaningful, long-term thinking is easy now. It is a more rational and survival approach, and now our brains are helping us instead of hurting us. Our brains are evaluating every moment and extrapolating it over 20 plus years to give suggestions and ideas what to do each time. And that is, I believe, or strongly believe, that long-term thinking can truly be a habit once we got to that place. But make no mistake, we will still not be complacent or sort of wait for it without doing anything, because as famous investor Naval said, impatient with action and patient with results. And this is where productivity comes in, because we can make sure to perform the necessary actions that will benefit all time scales while building a growing empire. And as a final note, I never thought I would say this ever, but as I've been practicing long-term thinking, I personally enjoy to be in the very beginning as of this video. After all, like, years will pass, both you and I will be so much better at what we do. It's only today that we can appreciate the dedication that we will tell lots and lots of stories about when we are at the top and where we want to be. And with that said, I hope you found this video very useful, and together with other stuff like non-neediness, long-term thinking will be a core theme for this channel. And you will see me and hear me say stuff like 20 plus years a lot, because when year 2043 has passed, we have truly won, since we've committed already now to what we're going to do, and probably have AI working for us at that point, so it will be huge. And as always, I'm interested to see your comments. What do you do to think long term? And maybe share some life stories between now and then. And until then, thank you so much for sticking around so far, and always remember that you're the most amazing human being alive.